Good day, people. So ThouArtThat has been posting some videos where he's in a dialogue with David Long, who did some stuff on him, Integral 2.0, and Matt was responding. And Matt and I did a dialogue just recently, and Matt's been doing a lot of videos lately, and this is ThouArtThat. I'll post a link down to his channel. But he's doing a lot of videos lately on evolutionary panpsychism, his concerns with emergentist positions, and I guess I want to chase down some of this because I guess I do disagree here, at least as I understand what Matt is saying about the necessity of a strong emergentist position to fall into a dualism. He sort of, I think he keeps wanting to say that if you have a strong emergentist position, then you're caught with something like downward causality, or you break the concatenated causal chains that are just there deterministically, and you're introducing a kind of freedom that you're going to have to explain, justify, clarify its origins, and this kind of stuff. Now, I think some of the difficulty that I have with Matt's position is that when we're talking or thinking about these things, the thought in the language makes it seem clearer and tighter and neater than it is. None of it is near. I mean, and it just this the problems and the complexities are nebulous. They're multi-layered. They're fraught with whole horizons of differences that would have to be addressed and integrated. I mean, the simplest example would be, and I like Kessler's work. When I do my grad class on systems theory, we talk about ghost in the machine. We talk about holons, and there's something very right-minded about this claim that parts, they end up leading into emergent wholes, which are more than the sum of the parts. And then even when we go to the parts, if we change the scale of analysis, they're their own kinds of wholes. And we could talk about that. Like, we could talk about something like the body as comprised of different organs, those organs being comprised of different cells, those cells being comprised of different kinds of molecular arrangements and or I guess physical arrangements, if we're going to go even further down into the the atomic level and whatnot. But I think when you start to deal with things like the hand and the larynx and the upright posture, the story of the body, I think it's Daniel Lieberman. It's such a fascinating book. You want to do a really good study of the particularities of the human body. I think of Raymond Tallis's work as well. I know you mentioned Stuart Kaufman. I think, these guys, Ernst Mayr is another, really great biologist, sort of stressing how biology is very different than physical systems. And I think, Matt, what I would say is, the body is so complex and it has so many different kinds of relations folding back upon itself. I mean, not only is my thumb able to touch each of the other fingers, but Raymond Tallis's work on the hand, that when my hand is able to hold itself stable and use one finger to kind of feel in a very discerning way the surfaces that's going on. So there's these lot of different dynamics going on that the expressions part and whole just don't really capture it. But I think the point would be that to say that emergentism falls into a dualism, I guess what I would ask, are you saying, is the claim then that there isn't significant and important differences, and I mean real distinctions, between the inorganic and the organic? See, because it seems to me we could chase down, are there organic molecules, like a bag of sugar? Is a bag of sugar alive? Well, it's not, but it came from a kind of organic chemistry. It's not just an inorganic, it's not removed from commerce with life. It has nutritive value in a way that a a particular element on the periodic chart perhaps just doesn't. But I mean, I think the way to come at the issue of dualism is that to say that there's a dualism, well, yeah, there is something called life, and then there's something that is not life. And if life emerged out of it, yeah, there are different things there, but that's not a dualism. And there's no way that I can see that someone is caught with a kind of dualism there. No, what you do is you show that emergent bodies have certain capacities that never violate any laws of physics. What they do is they're able to use sensory capacities, representational capacities of my eyes and my ears, and then use those to, have my hands actualize possibilities from the visual and audio fields. I mean, athletics wouldn't be the multi-billion-dollar industry it was if there wasn't something like intention, if there wasn't something like agency. It doesn't have to be superlative free will in some ridiculous dogmatic way. And I think you're in agreement with that. When we're talking about freedom, we're not talking about, some from on high freewheeling ability to do whatever one wants. No, there's always a system of constraints, and freedom is using constraints to put leverage into those physical systems. Again, one never has to violate a physical law in order to exercise agency. And it's not mysterious. I mean, take something so simple as sailing a ship. I was just on the Lake Michigan. I was in Lake Michigan yesterday. I got a friend who's got a pontoon boat. It's so lovely out there. It's really great to be on the water. So just some amazing sailboats out there. And I mean, I did a lot of sailing when I was a kid. And, a sailboat is like the exemplar case of humanly designed mechanisms for harnessing the natural energies that are around one. I mean, you go out and you're on the water. Now, there is a sense of physical force of the winds blowing you around. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're sailing, you're going to get blown around wherever the winds are going to take you. But if you learn how to tack the rigging and you learn how to angle it in certain ways, you can go against the wind. You just got to cut at certain angles. And so it's very apparent that, everything from, human ingenuity and the creativity that was involved in early creation of tools, but the way that has developed into very sophisticated machinery, all of these they're exemplars of something like an agency exercised in the world. They're clearly not epiphenomenal. Now, here would be the way to get at the epiphenomenal stuff. I mean, Matt, here's what I would ask you. What's the difference between remembering a sailing trip that I took and thinking about the fact that I sailed several days ago and that I could have, put up the sails earlier, or I could have tightened them, or I could have done different things, dropped the rudder down, different things in order to navigate? That's very different than me anticipating and actually moving forward in those procedures. See, I think the epiphenomenalism comes because people imagine that the sole relationship that people have with their environment is something like a representational one. Well, yeah, I mean, my eyes may be representing the visual field and my ears may be representing the auditory field, but my hands do a lot more than represent things. I mean, my hands are how I actualize those possibilities that I can see and hear and I guess ultimately think about, I guess largely because of language. Now, take language as another example. I think Bateson's work is so rich here, right, that if some person comes up to you and they grab you and they push you to the ground, now, depending upon their size, their strength, your size, your strength, there is a physical force that goes on and actual damage could be done. I mean, a person could hurt you if they come up and grab you and throw you to the ground. That's very different than a person coming up and insulting you. A person comes up and they say something. Oh, they say that you're ugly, or they say that you're dumb, or whatever. In those cases, it's not as if what they said causes your reaction. Now, again, your bodily response to being thrown to the ground, it will be some kind of, again, there will be physical repercussions from the physical actions that went on. Nothing like that is happening when people are speaking with one another. That is how I understand the insult. If I've been trained in Stoicism, I might say, well, why would you limit yourself to those two insults? I mean, there's certainly many more inadequacies than my stupidity and my ugliness, right? I mean, like how you respond to what people do actually defines the situation. See, we're in situations that are partly defined by our reactions to them, which is very different than how a body is pushed around. And we can calculate it through things like, kinetic energy, potential energy, chemical compositions in the muscles, and we can do all the, what kind of sugar load was needed for this exertion of this many pounds. You can't do that when you move toward this question of how do people capacitate themselves and get themselves resourced for responding in interactions. Right? I mean, there's an emergent qualitative difference there. I mean, I think, one of the ways to get at this is, I think you've suggested, at least as I understand it, that there is a sort of telos to the cosmos. And this is this Whiteheadian experience over millennia, including, I guess, you seem to want to suggest that there's something like an experience that's accumulating in the inorganic that ultimately gives way to the organic. To me, that is, that's a kind of poetry, and it's beautiful. But no, there just needs to be the orderliness. The orderliness can naturally precipitate certain kinds of relationships that then emerge, and they become domains where action is possible. And there's such a big difference between like a sense organ of an animal, of an organism, than a particle. I think there has to be something like appetite and desire and capacity to see predator and prey. There has to be hungers. Without those kinds of dynamic nutrient gradients, without something like a nutrient gradient, without something like a capacity to move toward an object of desire and the capacity to fail in, seeking one's desideratum, right? Without that, I'm not really sure what that is. I mean, it's something. You might talk about it, I remember talking with Terry Deacon about some of this, that, I think when you talk about sign systems, the, people like Peirce, he has a tendency to try to put the icon in front of the index and then go to the symbol. But no, I would say no, it's indexicality all the way down. There's just indices of concatenated causal chains that are, one thing is an indicator of what came before it, and it indicates what is to come next. I mean, there's a sort of connection in the kind of semiosis of indices, or kind of indexical chaining. And then once you get to organisms, now that kind of reversal happens, where now the organism does have the iconic sign. They have perceptual representation of aspects of its environment. They have something like a concept, something like an idea that is then recognized in the world in a sort of iconic sense. But I think if you're going to say there is a telos, I think part of and it is interesting to look at like evolutionary biology. I mean, the amazing developments that have happened over the last, say, 6 million years that have given way to the human body is incredible. But I don't know if you need something like a grand telos out of that. I mean, who knows? There's no way to know. Is there some grand purpose that, that to me, just, I would bracket that question. It doesn't really work for me. I think there doesn't seem to be a telos in some religious sense, some eschatological sense that, it's going to all make sense at the end, or it's culminating towards something. No, I don't think that's. I don't think that that's right. That just doesn't. I would have to see better evidence for that. Can there be telos in a given organism? Sure, there are tons of examples of predator and prey, and some organism is there and it sees a potential prey in the visual field and it seeks to stalk it out and hunt it out, and it's involved in the chase, and it's either successful or not. And so there's lots of little examples where we do have these sort of framed action patterns that have a teleology to them. But babies, they are born and then they grow, and there's some sort of teleology aligned with ontogeny, but then people age and they die. Even if I try to talk about the teleology in the classic entelechy sense of Aristotle, you have the acorn that goes all the way to the oak, but then eventually the oak dies and it gives way for, basically, you know, dirt and new forms of life. It rolls on. I think the question that some people may have for you, Matt, it's sort of lurking in the back about panpsychism, is what, if any, is the role of prayer? Does prayer have a role at all? See, because I think, for me, I don't know. Is there a being who hears prayers, who can respond to prayers, who's going to intervene? And all just starts to, I think you're going to say as well, that just sounds like dogmatic crackpot. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't a role for something like meditation and forms of self-relation, where one is trying to deal with one's own appetites, one's own desires, and ask not just how do I satisfy my desires, but are my desires really good for me? Are they good for other people? And again, there are forms of meditative self-reflection that move one towards social justice. I think those are very interesting. And to ask, what is the role of self-talk, or what is the kind of motivational consequences that are sort of brought with the possibilities of prayer? But at no point do you need a being who responds or even hears prayers. I'm not sure what you would say about prayer, because I think when people ask, what is thought, what is consciousness, that's where the gap, I think a huge gap comes in. That if you say that consciousness is somehow not produced by the body. Now, I guess, I would disagree with you there, I think, as well. That I think that consciousness is produced by the brain, it's produced by the body, but the body and the brain were produced by the orderliness of the cosmos. So in that roundabout way, yeah, it required the entire cosmos to create these particular bodies with these particular brains that then have this, again, amazing capacity of consciousness. And consciousness is, it's sort of an extension of all of the different sensory capacities at once. It's an extension of my ability to act, of my ability to see, my ability to hear and touch and taste and smell. And that it has this horizon of imaginative possibilities that are implied therein. Well, I guess I'll just leave it at that. And I'd love to see some of your responses to any of those questions. Hope all is well with you, man. Okay, take care. Bye.